In a state-run society, the government promises you security, but it's a false promise predicated on the idea that the opposite of security is risk. Nothing could be further from the truth. The opposite of security is insecurity, and the only way to overcome insecurity is to take risks. The gentle government that promises to hold your hand as you cross the street refuses to let go on the other side. And that was said by Theodore Forstmann. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I will be your host for the next hour. And it's certainly been an interesting week again, folks. It was quite pleasant to witness the lunar eclipse the other night. The first time we've had a lunar eclipse on a solstice for over 430 years, I believe. And we had a perfect view of it here on the east coast of Australia as it rose just above the ocean and performed its little show very soon after rising. While the moon was still quite large in the sky, it really was a very spectacular event. On a different note, something rather unfortunate that happened during the last week as well was the passing of Bill S510, the Insidious Food Safety Modernisation Act, which is designed to basically make food unsafe and to prevent people from being able to obtain safe and organic foods. It is very important that everybody disregard this bill. It is very important that everybody put in gardens as quickly as they can, and that if they see anybody being arrested under this corrupt legislation, that they go to their aid and support the people who may be being arrested by the Food Gestapo, otherwise known as the FDA. More interesting developments as well on the WikiLeaks front. We see the government is now attempting to bring conspiracy charges against Julian Assange. I would suggest that what Julian Assange and his accomplices have actually done is they have collaborated to bring the truth to the people, and what we are actually seeing is a government conspiracy to cover up the release of this information. I would suggest that the information being secret in the first place is a very good indication of a government conspiracy to conceal such information from the public anyway. So the government accusing anybody of a conspiracy in regards to the release of information by WikiLeaks really is a case of the pot calling the kettle black. They really do have the most demented and backward way of thinking, these governments, folks. They very much like to try to put the shoe on the other foot and make it appear that it's always the other guy's problem, it's always the other guy who's responsible. It's amazing, really, when you think about it. But suffice to say that if crime within government is exposed, then it's typical of the government to accuse the person who exposed the crime within government as being the actual criminal. It's really like some kind of super demented reverse psychology or something. Quite amazing, folks, quite amazing. And as I said last week, I don't pertain to support Julian Assange, and I don't pertain to not support Julian Assange. I'm on the fence with the whole thing. But what I think it is important to remember throughout the entire WikiLeaks saga is that it is not actually about Julian Assange, nor is it actually about the information he released. What it's about is censorship, freedom of speech, and the removal of government accountability. That's what the whole WikiLeaks saga is about. And as I said a couple of shows ago, it's also very interesting that this happened just before the release of a whole swag of documents pertaining to the crimes that have been carried out by the Bank of America, as I believe that the documents that were about to be released regarding Bank of America very likely showed that all of the mortgage foreclosures that we've seen in the last few years have all been completely and utterly illegal, that Bank of America had no right to foreclose on those mortgages, and that those people still own their homes. And this, of course, has the potential to bring about the largest lawsuit in the history of the United States. I think it's very telling that this entire WikiLeaks saga happened just prior to the release of that information. And as I said, this is the case regardless of what your opinion of Julian Assange is. I think it's very important to look at these things holistically. And of course, right on cue, in response to the actions of WikiLeaks, we now see the FCC announcing that they are going to implement regulation of the internet This is, of course, going to be done with the approval of the Obama regime. And folks, the advent of the Obama administration has certainly brought about change, though not the type of change that most people hope to see. But what Obama has done is, well, the Obama regime has been something almost akin to the Bush regime on steroids. Obama has removed so many rights from the people and nationalised so many things now. He's nationalised healthcare, he's now going to nationalise the internet, and it's very predictable that he would do so, folks, because that's what this entire WikiLeaks saga is all about. It's about freedom of speech and censorship. That's what it's about. And there can now be no denying that this is exactly what it's about, simply by the actions of the Obama regime in response to the WikiLeaks saga. They're almost too predictable sometimes, folks, these politicians. It really does become so obvious to see what the next move is going to be when one has obtained the right way of looking at things. And as I've said, it was, of course, very predictable that they would implement some form of regulation of the internet in response to WikiLeaks. That's truly what the whole thing was about. I mean, you don't get this type of media exposure for one event, and you don't have it blown up in such an out of proportion way, and you don't have the exposure of the crime being called a criminal so blatantly by all sources. I mean, there's very little objectivity in the media or in government or from any source that's actually defending the actions of Julian Assange. It's all about national security, because they like to convince people that national security actually means the security of the criminals within government rather than security of the nation. And folks, you just don't get all of this without it very much being a staged event designed to bring about a specific outcome, namely the censorship of the internet. And so it was very obvious what they were doing with the whole thing, folks. And that's what I mean when I say I'm on the fence with the whole Julian Assange thing. I mean, sure, he released a lot of good information. He withheld a lot of good information as well. He very notably never says anything bad about Israel or Zionism. And it is rather disturbing that he doesn't believe there's anything wrong with the official story of 9/11. That really does speak volumes, folks, but as I said, I am not one to judge what anyone's motivations may be. I simply looked at it on the global stage, and when one does that, it really does become quite obvious what this is all about. And it is, as I've said, freedom of speech and government accountability, censorship, and of course regulation of the internet. And that's why it's pointless arguing whether Assange is a shill, whether he's a government agent, whether he's releasing disinformation, whether he's working for Israel, whether he's a hero. It's all irrelevant in regard to the true matter at hand, because it is not about Julian Assange. It is not about the information he released. It's about censorship. The whole thing is about censorship. They're very clever, folks, the way they do these things, and nothing is ever the way it seems. So due to this WikiLeaks case, we are seeing even now the end of net neutrality. We are seeing the powers that be wanting to bring in legislation which will severely limit the way people use the internet. And folks, it's got to be made very clear to everybody that this is not being done to protect the people. It's not being done to preserve national security. What it's being done for is to cover up the criminality that exists within government. You see, these sociopathic slimeballs within government are now having their dirty laundry aired. People are now seeing how corrupt the system is and how corrupt the scumbags within the system are, and they are claiming that it's a breach of national security for their criminality to be made public. And so that's what the end of net neutrality and the introduction of internet censorship is all about. It's about protecting the criminals within government. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we actually had a police force that stood up to prevent crime and to protect the citizens against crime, folks? Wouldn't it be wonderful if the police actually did the job that we employ them to do, and they just suddenly went and arrested these politicians and said, hey guys, we know what you're doing, and we're not going to let you get away with it. We're actually going to see that you are held accountable for your actions. Wouldn't that be wonderful, folks? A working police force that actually prevented crime and convicted criminals. rather than oppress the people, and defended criminality. I know it's a big ask, but I can dream, can't I? I mean, through this whole WikiLeaks saga, the entire mainstream media and the entire legal justice and police system have been very much exposed as the subservient government lackeys that the organisations actually are, simply by the lack of action towards the criminality that has been exposed within government, and the willingness of these organisations to focus on the person who released the data as the actual criminal in this case, which of course could not be further from the truth. The end of net neutrality truly is a huge blow against the citizens of the world, folks. The internet is currently the only place we have left where we can speak freely. Lord knows we certainly can't do it on the street anymore. The internet is the only place where people can meet from all around the world, and they can get information out to each other. When someone is wrongly arrested or brutalised by government, the information gets published on the internet very quickly and the rest of the world finds out about it. Censoring the internet will curtail all of that type of activity. Censoring the internet will prevent people from being able to expose the crimes within government, and that is the sole reason why the government wants the net censored. From a governmental perspective, the internet is the biggest out-of-control animal in our society today. The information that is available on the internet is something that horrifies governments, because through the internet their power has been slowly slipping, and it continues to slip. And so we must stand up against internet censorship, and should we see the end of net neutrality, it's very important that people boycott all of the main big sites and they start creating their own underground network. The internet is one of the last bastions of free speech that the people have, and it is one of the most important tools that the people have ever had to fight government corruption, and it really must be protected at all cost. Now, I've been coming onto these shows for a couple of years now, folks, and I've been bringing you information about what's been going on in the world, and I've been attempting to offer you suggestions on how you can deal with this information, how you can combat the problems that we face. I've very much attempted to explain why combating these problems cannot be done violently. It simply won't work if it's done violently, and we only have to look at history to confirm that fact. And I've attempted to convey to all the listeners out there the simplicity of how these problems really can be faced, and that is by building community. Now, when I say building community, I'm not saying go and build a alternate community. I'm not saying leave the community you have and go and build an alternate society. I'm saying build community within the community you have now. Something as simple as getting to know your neighbours and supporting your neighbours, supporting them emotionally, supporting them physically. Go out and help in the yard if there's something that you can do together. Perhaps you're a carpenter or a mechanic and you can do something for your neighbours. Perhaps they have a small job that you could help out with. Perhaps you're someone who likes to bake. Perhaps you're someone who likes to collect flowers and do flower arrangements. When you bake some extra and give them to the neighbours. If you're someone who likes to collect flowers from your garden, collect some extra and give them to your neighbours. If you are an artist, maybe give a painting to your neighbours for Christmas or something. Do what you can to break down those barriers, and giving to people is a good way to do it. And folks, it doesn't matter what rung of the social ladder you may perceive your neighbours to be on, because ultimately there is no social ladder and your neighbours are essentially just like you. So you need to break down these divisions, you need to break down these barriers that people have with each other. Because just by connecting with your neighbours and standing up for the rights of your neighbours, giving them someone to depend on and knowing that you have someone to depend on, this is how we change society. Because if everybody did this, if the entire neighbourhood did this, then suddenly the entire neighbourhood would all know each other. And If there was a problem with the authorities in regards to someone in the neighbourhood, the entire neighbourhood would stand up in defence of that person. And this can be extrapolated out to go past your neighbourhood and to go to your entire suburb and then to your entire city and your entire state and your entire country. Once people establish this connection with each other and they establish these ties with each other, break down these fictitious borders and barriers of division and realise that we are all in this together, and that the only reason the government can do things like bring an end to net neutrality, bring in bills like S510, is because the people are divided. That's the only way that they can get away with any of this stuff, folks, is because the people are divided. And folks, you've just got to look at the whole scholastic system, the educational system, the social system, the business systems. All of the models that we have in our society are all designed as hierarchical systems that purposely work to keep people divided. That's what it's all about, divide and conquer. And when you see that all these things are in place to divide people, then you have to ask yourself why. And once you do this, it becomes glaringly apparent that the way to combat all of the problems that we face is through common unity of the people. Building community within the community you have now. We don't need to go and build alternate societies. We need to fix the society that we have now. And it's really not that hard to do. You just have to start looking at things from a different perspective, folks. Put yourself back. I've often said, stand back, step back into space and just look at the world. Look at the world holistically and see how it all functions, see how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And when you do this, it becomes so apparent that division is the whole problem. And therefore it becomes glaringly obvious that the solution to every problem that we face is unity. Humanity simply must unite as one species. And I'm not talking about any global government. I'm not talking about any form of government at all. I'm simply talking about people connecting with their neighbours. And folks, if you did this, it would grow out like a grassroots thing. If you connect with the people next door to you, and the people next door to you connect with you and the people next door to them on the other side, and then it just goes on right throughout the entire globe, and it's almost like someone just switching on a light that eventually permeates to every house and every family on the planet. And that would truly be a wonderful thing to see. Folks, if the government is allowed to get away with ending net neutrality, if the government is allowed to bring in the censorship it wants to bring in, we won't know about such things as the collateral murder video showing the murder of Reuters news reporters by an American gunship over Baghdad. We won't know about the war crimes that are being committed daily in Afghanistan in our name. We won't know about the atrocities that happened in Iraq at Abu Ghraib. We won't know about such things as the civilian brutalized by police on the streets of Denver because he offered support to a driver who was being falsely accused by police. And folks, these people are criminals. The police who falsely accused a driver of a crime and then hospitalized a witness. These people are criminals, folks. And these criminals will never be brought to public attention if the internet is allowed to be censored. There are no reputable or workable watchdogs currently on the government. There are no systems in place, there are no dependable eyes that will ever hold the government accountable for its actions. And so therefore the only people who are able to do that, and the only people who should do that, and on whose shoulders the duty to keep watchful eyes on the government rests, is the people. And the only workable method we have of doing this and for bringing the crimes of government to public attention is the internet. And that's why everybody needs to start making noise about this. Everybody needs to write to their senators, write to their congressmen, write to every politician that you can, write to newspapers, editorials, hand out flyers in the streets, do whatever you can, but get the word out that we need to preserve the internet in its current form. And if internet censorship is brought in, then we will refuse to cooperate, and we will do it in mass. Because we understand that the only people who benefit from internet censorship are the criminals within government who seek to prevent their crimes from ever being exposed. The internet is the people's tool. The internet is the new media. Everybody knows that they can't trust the mainstream news sources anymore. Information is available on the internet sometimes weeks ahead of when it's seen on the major networks. And the alternate media has become the real media. The alternate media has become the most dependable source of truth and real information that exists anywhere on the planet. The mainstream media outlets make claim that they have access to the largest news gathering networks on Earth. But we the people already have access to the best news gathering network on Earth, folks, and that is the internet. If there's a riot in Chechnya, we can simply log on to a Chechen chat room and ask the people on the street what's going on. We can get information on the ground all around the world through the internet. And this will all end if we see an end to net neutrality. We will be forced to depend upon the propaganda we are fed by mainstream sources. You see, the governments desperately seek to turn the internet into something like a cross between a right-wing propaganda machine and a giant shopping mall. And that's what they would like to turn it into. And the only thing that stands in the way of them doing just that is we, the people. And so this is something that we really do need to act on. Because, as I said, the internet is the best tool for freedom that we currently have. This tool can only remain workable if net neutrality is preserved, and so net neutrality must be preserved at all costs. Remember, folks, we elect these governments to act in the best interests of the people. They are our elected representatives, and taking away your freedom and removing themselves of accountability is not national security. In fact, it is quite the opposite. Because the nation can never, ever be secure if the government is removed of accountability and if it is left without a watchdog. And as I just said, the only workable watchdog that has ever existed or will ever exist is the people themselves. So if there was ever any issue that you wanted to stand up for, folks, this is the one. This is the big moment. This is when the human race can really show that we have come into our power, and we can stand up and we can prevent this from happening. Because should we fail to do so, then, well, I won't be speaking to you for very much longer, I'd say, folks, because I doubt very much whether websites like the Crow House or voices such as mine will survive. And it won't just be me, folks. It'll be any alternate voice that's speaking out against the government. It will be all alternative media. We will see severe censorship of places such as YouTube even. A loss of people's ability to be able to even open blogs that aren't censored. And effectively the silencing of any voice that dares to speak out against the banking regime that appears to be poised on the very brink of world domination. But I think it's about break time now, folks, so I'll leave it there for now, and I'll come back and speak to you again in a few minutes. And as always, thank you very much for listening. Welcome back, folks. Now, for years we've been expecting some sort of government move to censor the internet. There's been many sources that have claimed that the internet will be regulated by 2012. We've seen it here in Australia. The government has attempted to implement mandatory internet censorship a couple of times, but they have not yet been successful. We've had Obama wanting an internet kill switch. We've seen signs from very many directions that they've been wanting to do this for a very long time. But there was always complaints, there was always problems, people were always up in arms, ISPs always claimed they couldn't do it, they claimed it would be too difficult, that any form of censorship would essentially end up being a blanket censorship, and many thousands of websites that there was no problem with would also end up censored. And so no form of censorship could ever truly be justified. And that's what this WikiLeaks saga has done. It's put an end to the complaining about blanket censorship of the internet, because they're now claiming that it's justified on the grounds of national security. Because again, they are presenting national security as in fact protecting the criminality within government rather than actually protecting the nation. They say such things like, if the President or the Congress or Senate was ever exposed for committing crimes and arrested, then it would undermine the nation's faith in the country and it would cause mass turmoil. But of course we all know that if they are a criminal, then they should be arrested and held accountable for their actions regardless of what position they hold. The President is still a person the same as anybody else. See, the criminals in government think national security means a situation where the people are not up in arms against the government, and essentially saying that the nation is insecure if the criminals within government are ever in danger of prosecution. That's what they're claiming national security means. But as I've said many times, what the nation actually is the people of the nation. You are the nation, not the government. The government is simply the administrative arm of the people, or apparently that's what we elect them to be. And the nation will never ever be secure if there are criminals within government and if the government is removed of accountability. And this is not to say that we need to get rid of the government. We just need to unite the people so that we can hold the government accountable for its actions. Because the government is just people, folks, just like you, just like me. There's no difference between any of us. And so if we had a united people across the globe, we could still have these governments in place, but we need to have these governments accountable to the people, not the people accountable to the government. That's not the way it's supposed to be. See, it's all been reversed. We need these people to ensure that we have schools, that we have functional roads, functional healthcare, functional education system, that everything runs smoothly. And I would point out that these are all things that we need as society, and they are things that the governments seem to be grossly inept at providing, whereas they seem to be more fascinated with presenting more and more rules and making society more subservient to government. So that should be a bit of a sign, folks. And what we need to combat all of this is a united community that actually holds the governments accountable. We need to realise that we are the government watchdog. We don't need the government putting laws in place that prevent themselves from being watched by the people, because who else is going to watch them? I mean, obviously, if these governments put themselves at the top of the national food chain, then nobody is going to watch them. They're not accountable to anybody. And that's the problem. See, this isn't democracy, folks. If governments aren't transparent and aren't held accountable for their actions by the people, then democracy is simply a hollow word. And I don't particularly agree with democracy anyway. Democracy is, as many people have said, two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. I mean, to be brutally honest, I don't really believe in any form of government, folks. I think anarchy would be a lot better. And no, anarchy does not mean violence. It simply indicates the lack of a governing body. But if we are going to have any form of government at all, then what we need is a constitutional republic. We don't really need a democracy at all. Democracy is simply mob rule. Lynch mob is a great example of democracy. So I'm sure we can do better than that, folks. But whatever we do, we certainly need a change from the system that we currently have. And key to the whole thing, key to bringing about any type of positive change, is for people to understand that we, the people, are actually the holders of the original jurisdiction above the government. It is we who appoint the government to act on our behalf. That is the basis of any Western democratic system, or so we are told. But even if we were to go to their system, even if we were to embrace democracy rather than being constitutional republics the way we should be, well, If we are to embrace democracy, then we are living in a situation of mob rules, and we, the people, are the mob, so therefore we make the rules. I mean, that's pretty obvious as well. You see, even under their own system, the government is accountable to us. And we don't have to do anything to force them to comply with our wishes. All we have to do is stop complying with theirs. Stop complying with any rules that interfere with society being society and interfere with the rights of any human being to live in their natural state of abundance. And that's the attitude we need to adopt, my friends. Because we've tried to live our lives the official way, and from doing so we are now in a situation where there is something very wrong with our world. Everything in our world is backwards. The governments that we elect and appoint to act on behalf of the people fail to do so, but instead style themselves as the rulers of the people. Our society does nothing but turn the abundance of the earth into rubbish. We seem to spend most of our lives simply pulling stuff out of the earth and turning it into something that eventually ends up on a trash heap somewhere. It's a throwaway society, and unfortunately we've become so accustomed to this throwaway society that we also tend to throw away the people within it and even the society itself. Due to our indulgence in this throwaway society, due to our dependence upon illusionary concepts of social standing, and due to our collective failure to be able to comprehend the reality of our surroundings, the human race is on the verge of allowing itself to be locked down into a totalitarian system, the likes of which the world has truly never seen. But the solution is right there at our fingertips, as long as the people of the world see the opportunity that has been provided for us, and we collectively act while the opportunity is still available. All of the measures that are being implemented against us by the government, Bill S510, the loss of net neutrality, all of these things can be effectively combated simply through human unity. And many people are now beginning to understand this. People are beginning to wake up to the connection that they have to other people, and there are significant steps towards global unity being implemented, and the loss of net neutrality will severely curtail all of these activities. It will also make it very easy to lock down and suppress certain areas of the globe. It will make it a lot easier for people to simply disappear in the night, as there will not be any way of conveying such information to the world at large, and we certainly can't expect the media to report on these things, as the media has long since been bereft of any credibility and has simply been the propaganda arm of the government for a great many years now. You see, the media was the watchdog, folks. The media was what we had to keep track on the government, to keep the government in check. But that's all changed. The media used to consist of hundreds of small corporations who all competed with each other to get the latest scoop and bring the best news to the people. But it's not like that anymore. Now the media is a well-oiled and very controlled machine that's run by, I think it's just 4 corporations now. It used to be 6, but I believe it's now 4. So you essentially have the main shareholders of just 4 corporations controlling all of the information that the public receive. And the media was supposed to be the bastion of free speech, the government watchdog, the means to keep the people informed. The media was put there so that the people would always find out truth. But now the mainstream media simply functions as the public relations division of government. And when you gain an understanding of the reality of this, then it becomes very clear that the only watchdog we, the people, have over the government is the people ourselves. No one else is going to do it, folks. It's absolutely up to us, and we must not shirk in this responsibility, because we owe it to our children not to do so. You see, that's the thing, folks. It's not actually about us. It's about our descendants, our children and our children's children. It's about realizing that we are simply the custodians of this earth, as we are the custodians of the political and legal system. And it is up to us to ensure that these systems remain pure and true and healthy, and that freedom is preserved for future generations. And this particular time in history is a very significant time in history, because the responsibility falls squarely upon the shoulders of this generation to ensure that freedom is preserved, because we are currently in the moment of transition, and we cannot afford to be apathetic, we cannot afford to be complacent, and we cannot afford to simply ignore the situation. And as I said, should we choose to simply ignore the situation, then the inevitable result will be to condemn our descendants to an extremely insecure future. You see, it really is that important, folks. And I suppose part of it comes down to how you would like this generation to be remembered, because we are at a history-making crossroads in human evolution. And this generation will be remembered as the one who was on the front line, because it is up to this generation alone to decide whether humanity will blossom into true freedom, or whether we will simply slide down the dark road into an inescapable tyranny. Okay, folks, so what about the good side to all this? Is there a good side to all this? There has to be a good side, doesn't there? Well, folks, fortunately there is a good side, and the good side is how easy it is for us to remedy this entire situation. I mean, really, when you look at it, folks, we're being attacked on all fronts. They're chemtrailing us, they've got all these toxins in the food, they've got all these toxins and fluoride in the water, they're crashing the monetary system, and the price of everything is skyrocketing, and the price of land is falling because no one can afford to buy any. And the government tells us the economy is in desperate straits because people aren't spending enough. I mean, everybody's in debt up to their eyeballs, and they're telling us we're not spending enough. It's ridiculous. Spend more money, get more in debt so we can take you home. It's a wonderful little industry they've got going. And folks, all we need to do is to realise how fictitious this whole system is. The whole money system is fictional. The whole credit and debt system is fictional. The whole legal system is fictional. It only exists on paper. The whole social structure we've got is fictional. And all we have to do to fix all of the problems that we face is to connect with each other, to start following the one law. I've often said there is only one law of all creation, and that is absolute unconditional love and service to the creation, which of course includes yourself. Serve others as you would serve yourself, and serve yourself as you would serve others. It's very simple. And while doing so, understand that you are one of the custodians of this planet. And so keep your home in a good state in order that you may pass it on to those who will come after you. Make the world a little bit better because you are in it. Don't go fighting wars. Don't imagine that the meaning of life is a collection of more and more useless trinkets. It's ridiculous. Start helping those around you. Start helping the earth. Stand up for what's right. If a law is unjust, disregard it. As Albert Einstein said, never do anything against conscience, even if the state demands it. So it isn't like there hasn't been like 1,000 people throughout history that have all told us the same thing. Everybody has said that all we have to do is do what's right, all we have to do is act with our conscience, and that all it takes for evil to be perpetuated is for good people to look on and do nothing. So it isn't like we haven't been told how to fix this situation and time again. It's just that we've never taken it on board. We've never actually stood up and done it. But now we're facing a situation where we really don't have any choice. And the beauty of all the things that we're facing is that all of these things are opportunities for us to do exactly this. All of them are opportunities for growth. It's just up to us as to whether we accept and embrace the opportunities we're being provided with. I mean, we will eventually, the human race will eventually stand up and shake off the shackles that we are now threatened with. But how long will it take? How much worse will it have to get before people wake up to the fact that this whole system is fictional and that we don't actually have to do any of this stuff? It's pretty simple, folks. And if everybody in the world just suddenly decided to follow the one law, then we could change reality with such speed that it would be literally stunning. All we really have to do is to want to, and then to stand up and put the wheels in motion. And I believe that we will, folks. I truly believe that we will, though I also believe that it will unfortunately have to get a little bit worse yet before the many who are sleeping actually wake up to the fact that they're being scammed. But I believe that we'll do it, and we will get through the worst of it, and we will eventually neutralise the looming police state that we are currently threatened with. Personally, I don't think the elite stand a chance of implementing the type of measures that they wish to implement. I think that their brains are a little dysfunctional for even trying and even believing that they'll be able to get away with it, because they won't. I mean, they might succeed for a little while in the short term, but ultimately they will fail, because I don't believe the human spirit is something that will be so easily overcome. We're a pretty resilient bunch, folks, and personally I see the whole thing as a wonderful challenge. I think it is truly a remarkable and historic moment to be alive, and I really firmly, truly believe that the human race will come into its power. I mean, it has to happen. It just depends on how long it takes, but the way things are going, we will eventually be forced into a situation where we have no choice but to do so, because if we choose not to do so, then we won't survive. And survival instinct is very strong, folks. It will kick in eventually. Well, we're starting to get close to the end of the show now, folks. I would like to put out a couple of thank yous this week. The first person I would like to thank is Frank Stephan, who runs the American Voice Radio Network. If it wasn't for Frank, I wouldn't be on the air. He has been most kind, and if it wasn't for Frank, then none of you would be listening to me. I'd also like to thank Big John Lipscomb, who first interviewed me on the radio, and without him doing so, I certainly would not have the show that I have now. I'd like to sincerely thank a lady by the name of Elizabeth Patton, who has been transcribing many of the more recent radio shows that I've done and sending me the transcripts so I'm able to post them on the Crow House. She's done this just off her own bat. I never asked her to do so, and she hasn't done all the shows, folks, but she has transcribed a substantial amount of the latter shows, and I truly do wish to offer Liz my most sincere thank you. And folks, I would also like to thank all of you, all of the people who listen to the radio show, all of the people who patronise the website, all the people who share my video clips and my radio shows with their friends and post them all over the internet, which they do. I've found them in so many places now. So my most sincere thanks goes to the people who share this information, all of my Facebook friends, all of my YouTube friends, all of the people who leave such positive comments on my channel and who email me with such positive feedback. I was overwhelmed at the amount of positive feedback I received to the last show that I did, which was an interview with Rick Simpson. A great many people have sent me thanks in regard to that show, and I very much appreciate the kind words that so many people have offered. I do intend to have Rick back on the show again soon. I might even get him on for a 5 or 10 minute spot at the end of the show once a month or so that he can keep us updated with how things are panning out for him and the progress he's making with the release of his book. That show was, of course, 2 weeks ago. There was no show from me last week, folks, and that was because of the weather. The weather has truly been out of control here in Australia. It's been raining like forever, I think. But as many of you know, I live in a very small cabin, and my cabin has a tin roof, and it was literally raining so heavily last week that it was virtually impossible to hear my voice above the rain on the tin roof, and I was simply unable to do a radio show because of it. So my most sincere apologies. Poor Frank had to play a rerun, but you get that, folks. I simply can't control the weather. I think that's probably up to a little crew in Alaska who run the HAARP station. I'd also like to send out a most sincere thank you to anybody who has ever donated or contributed to the Crow House in any way. It is very much appreciated. It is indeed the only thing that has kept the website going, and were it not for people's donations, it would have been closed a long time ago. And I also doubt very much that I would be still speaking to you all on air. If you ever can make a contribution to the website, it is very much appreciated. It's always sorely needed. Everything that I have on the website I've put there for all of you. This site contains no advertising. It will never contain any advertising. Everything on the site is free. It will always be free. I will not sell information to people. I believe that if I give people information, it will empower them. If I sell people information, it disempowers them. And there is a lot of power in giving. I believe that if you do give unconditionally, then things do balance out. And I'm living proof that it does work, folks. In the last couple of years, my life has been one amazing succession of synchronistic events after another. So if you ever can contribute or give to the website, it does empower you by giving, and it does empower me by receiving. So if you do ever feel a need in your heart to contribute to the website, please know that it is very much appreciated. I'm sorry that I simply don't get a chance to answer the people who donate or to send thank you mails out to people who donate, but I'm stretched pretty thin, folks. I don't get a lot of time to do very much these days, apart from run the website, do the radio shows, answer emails, and what research I can in order to be able to bring you the information that I do. And the spare time that I have left, I do try to dedicate some of it to writing my second book, but unfortunately I've had to put that on hold while I work on the new film, so it does get a little bit busy for me at times, folks. Now, I've received a lot of email recently from people who've been telling me that they're feeling disconnected. They've been essentially having writer's block. If they're a creative person, they're finding it difficult to paint or to create music if they're a musician, or even to function properly in relationships. There's certain amounts of intolerance that seem to be building with people all around the place, and a lot of people are feeling disconnected from energy. And this is truly a global thing that's going on, folks. I know that it is because of the amount of emails that I've had from all over the place. So I'm going to try to talk about that a little bit next week. I think it's a little bit late in the day for getting into a topic that complex at the moment. And there's also been a lot of people who've been asking me about community gatherings and what they can do at meetings should they start having meetings in their local area. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit about that as well. But of course, a lot of it's got to be up to you folks. You've got to sort of go with the spontaneity and do what's right for your own particular area. Perhaps even if you played some of the radio shows, or you could have a film night would be a good way to start. Get people in there and maybe listen to one of these radio shows. All of the shows are available on thecrowhouse.com, very often with a descriptive slideshow that I put together when I listen to the show back after it goes to air, and I create a YouTube clip that complements the dialogue from the show. Perhaps you could play one of these clips at a meeting and then have a discussion about it. Perhaps you could play a film, one of my films or one of many other films that are available on what's going on in the world. I would suggest not starting with films that are too hardcore. Don't start with anything that's too paranoid or is going to give people information overload in the first 10 minutes of their introduction to this information. Try to just play things casually and just see how you go. But I'm sure that would be a pretty good place to start, folks, to just get some form of viewable material or listening material, listen to it and view it, and then have a discussion about it. That would seem to be a good place to start. And just go with the spontaneity of it and see where it goes from there. But as I said, I will try to discuss this sort of stuff a little bit more, and a bit more about the disconnection people are feeling at the moment on next week's show, but I will have to leave it till then because I think we're pretty well out of time, folks. So, it has been a pleasure talking to you again. Thank you very much for listening to the shows. Thank you for your continued support. The many of you who have emailed me, even though I don't often have time to return your emails, it is truly a pleasure to receive them, and I truly feel honoured that you would even choose to write to me the way you do. You truly have been the most wonderful audience and the most wonderful group of people that I could ever have had the good fortune to get to know. But I'll have to leave it here for now. It has been a pleasure talking to you again. I will look forward to speaking to you again next week. Take care until then, and goodbye for now. In Lak'ech. Bank of America had no right to foreclose on those mortgages, and that those people still own their homes. And this, of course, has the potential to bring about the largest lawsuit in the history of the United States. I think it's very telling that this entire WikiLeaks saga happened just prior to the release of that information. And as I said, this is the case regardless of what your opinion of Julian Assange is. I think it's very important to look at these things holistically. And of course, right on cue, in response to the actions of WikiLeaks, we now see the FCC announcing that they are going to implement regulation of the internet. This is, of course, going to be done with the approval of the Obama regime. And folks, the advent of the Obama administration has certainly brought about change, though not the type of change that most people hope to see. But what Obama has done is, well, the Obama regime has been something almost akin to the Bush regime on steroids. Obama has removed so many rights from the people and nationalised so many things now. He's nationalised healthcare, he's now going to nationalise the internet, and it's very predictable that he would do so, folks, because that's what this entire WikiLeaks saga is all about. It's about freedom of speech and censorship. In a state-run society, the government promises you security, but it's a false promise predicated on the idea that the opposite of security is risk. Nothing could be further from the truth. The opposite of security is insecurity, and the only way to overcome insecurity is to take risks. The gentle government that promises to hold your hand as you cross the street refuses to let go on the other side. And that was said by Theodore Forstmann. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I will be your host for the next hour. And it's certainly been an interesting week again, folks. It was quite pleasant to witness the lunar eclipse the other night. The first time we've had a lunar eclipse on a solstice for over 430 years, I believe. And we had a perfect view of it here on the east coast of Australia as it rose just above the ocean and performed its little show very soon after rising. While the moon was still quite large in the sky, it really was a very spectacular event. On a different note, something rather unfortunate that happened during the last week as well was the passing of Bill S-510, the Insidious Food Safety Modernisation. Make it appear that it's always the other guy's problem, it's always the other guy who's responsible. It's amazing, really, when you think about it. But suffice to say that if crime within government is exposed, then it's typical of the government to accuse the person who exposed the crime within government as being the actual criminal. It's really like some kind of super demented reverse psychology or something. Quite amazing, folks, quite amazing. And as I said last week, I don't pertain to support Julian Assange, and I don't pertain to not support Julian Assange. I'm on the fence with the whole thing. But what I think it is important to remember throughout the entire WikiLeaks saga is that it is not actually about Julian Assange, nor is it actually about the information he released. What it's about is censorship, freedom of speech, and the removal of government accountability. That's what the whole WikiLeaks saga is about. And as I said a couple of shows ago, it's also very interesting that this happened just before the release of a whole swag of documents pertaining to the crimes that have been carried out by the Bank of America. as I believe that the documents that were about to be released regarding Bank of America very likely showed that all of the mortgage foreclosures that we've seen in the last few years have all been completely and utterly illegal. The censorship, that's what it's about. And there can now be no denying that this is exactly what it's about, simply by the actions of the Obama regime in response to the WikiLeaks saga. They're almost too predictable sometimes, folks, these politicians. It really does become so obvious to see what the next move is going to be when one has obtained the right way of looking at things. And as I've said, it was, of course, very predictable that they would implement some form of regulation of the internet in response to WikiLeaks. That's truly what the whole thing was about. I mean, you don't get this type of media exposure for one event, and you don't have it blown up in such an out of proportion way, and you don't have the exposure of the crime being called a criminal so blatantly by all sources. I mean, there's very little objectivity in the media or in government or from any source that's actually defending the actions of Julian Assange. It's all about national security, because they like to convince people that national security actually means the security of the criminals within government rather than security of the nation. And folks, you just don't get all of this without it very much being a staged event designed to bring about a specific outcome, namely the Mission Act, which is designed to basically make food unsafe and to prevent people from being able to obtain safe and organic foods. It is very important that everybody disregard this bill. It is very important that everybody put in gardens as quickly as they can, and that if they see anybody being arrested under this corrupt legislation, that they go to their aid and support the people who may be being arrested by the Food Gestapo, otherwise known as the FDA. More interesting developments as well on the WikiLeaks front. We see the government is now attempting to bring conspiracy charges against Julian Assange. I would suggest that what Julian Assange and his accomplices have actually done is they have collaborated to bring the truth to the people, and what we are actually seeing is a government conspiracy to cover up the release of this information. I would suggest that the information being secret in the first place is a very good indication of a government conspiracy to conceal such information from the public anyway. So the government accusing anybody of a conspiracy in regards to the release of information by WikiLeaks really is a case of the pot calling the kettle black. They really do have the most demented and backward way of thinking, these governments, folks. They very much like to try to put the shoe on the other foot.